I would just echo exactly what Joy and Jen said as well. And like right now at HIMSS, a lot of what we're doing is re-educating internal stakeholders about the importance of the content they're developing in order for us to actually leverage it and engage our audience. And this is a continuous education process over and over again that we really need to kind of hit home with everyone, is that how key it is to have a story, to have a message, and have a target audience in mind so that we can actually take it and amplify it and then ultimately have a conversation about it and get more people involved in the discussion.
So I just want to say something about HIMSS, because I think what you did at this last HIMSS was really beautiful by having the social media ambassadors. Mandi was one and I was one, and so we were able to amplify your message through our networks, and I think you ended up with pretty huge number of impressions and accounts reached as a result of it. So I just wanted to say a little bit about content and then Twitter. So I'm really interested in driving people to read my content, because I write, what do writers want? They want people to read their stuff, right? I mean, I'm not a pure marketing person, so I'm not writing content to sell something necessarily, but I want people to read my stuff. One of the things that I've found is I'll tweet my posts as a way of getting them out there to, I have like 15,000 followers, and they'll get tweeted, they'll get retweeted, I'll have this amazing number of accounts reached and impressions, but then when I go over and I look at how many people click through and actually read the blog, there's really kind of a disconnect. And so I think it's important that we understand that Twitter has its own message, and you better be sure that you say everything you want in those 140 characters, because you're probably not going to come over and read the 1,600 words that are behind it on the link that you have.
Yeah. I want to just revisit something really quickly. I think there were 76,000 tweets related to the HIMSS 14 hashtag.
There was,
just during
absolutely.
the conference.
Yeah, just during those 5 days.
Yeah, just during those 5 days. So from a social media standpoint, that's huge. That's 76,000 opportunities to to get a message across.
And long tail, because people are still using the hashtag to
I used it today. Yeah, indeed. All right, so from that perspective then, Joy, how does Amendola evaluate social media platforms for engagement with its clients?
Evaluating if that's where their target audience is at all. I mean, as a social media person, we want to say it's right for everyone and everyone should jump on board. But in a lot of instances, you have markets where they're not using it. So it becomes increasingly important to really evaluate those individual platforms to see where we can really get those key targeted messages out in the correct vehicle.
I'd say other things that I look at in that same vein is like, will this new platform or new social network actually enhance my relationship with my audience? Does this provide a unique opportunity for us to maybe share a message in a different way that we've never done before as an organization? But I think audience first is definitely what you need to look at.
Right.
So I have a specific example. Since I'm in the business of trying to sell my content, and we write a lot about clinical issues in healthcare, controversies in healthcare, health IT, health policy, and so forth, kind of heavy topics. I actually find that I probably generate more readership when I try and use it judiciously. But if I post on LinkedIn, and I will put a link to the article, which then scrolls down, I actually get a lot of people reading that way. And it's probably because Shahid just told me they read the long articles as opposed to Twitter. They read 140 characters.
Right. Well, there are a lot of new social media platforms, and I know that Jen and I had this conversation last week that we're very interested to find out, how do you evaluate new platforms? Like, how do you define the efficacy of something like Vine or Tumblr or Instagram in your larger social media strategy, particularly as a large organization, right? So I wonder, from a client perspective, when you're evaluating this, if there's no ROI because it's a new platform, or you can't measure it yet, you can't quantify it yet, like how do you make sure that you are still delivering the expected types of content, and that you can maybe be on the cusp of delivering ROI in these new platforms that might not have otherwise been considered?
I think you use the PPC method of the world and you test. That's going to be a really huge part. Also, helping your clients understand what ROI looks like. I think that the lines between social media and sales are sometimes blurred, and they're two very different animals that need to be handled in very different ways. Again, social media being the tool. So I think sitting down with your clients and really defining at the core what ROI is and what success looks like and what is realistic if you're vetting a new platform and understanding that and you're getting on the cusp of something, then you can have mutual agreement on what works.
I think that we'll probably revisit that in a minute, but I want to make sure that I get over to Cari and talk about something that Pat just brought up. That you introduced your inaugural crop of social media ambassadors this year, and I was very excited to be one of them. How did HITMC make the decision to do that? Like, what analysis went into effect in order for that to happen, and have you guys had an opportunity to measure the outcome?
So yeah, I mean, we basically had the idea of having this social media ambassador program after we were kind of seeing a change in people applying for media badges at the show, and we were seeing that there was not always like a traditional media publication tied to those that were applying for it. So we were looking for a way to kind of bring on social media ambassadors or social media influencers in a way to the conference, and then also take advantage of that partnership by giving them some perks. So when we were looking at it, really the idea was to bring them on so that we could maybe reach a different audience that we don't normally hit through our channels or through the people that are live tweeting the show. And as influencers like Mandi and like you guys definitely bring a different voice and a different perspective to share the experience of the conference. And analyzing it, what was really interesting was that we did have a record-breaking year of tweets tied to the conference in the 5 days. We had about 76,000. 3,200 of those were from social media ambassadors. But I think that those 3,200 probably pulled in a whole slew of other participants that we'd never seen before. So that's an interesting perspective on when we were doing some analysis of the conversation. Also looking at the number of people that participated in the conversation this year, we had 18,000 plus versus last year where we had 6,000, so we doubled. So I think that, I can't completely attribute it to the social media ambassador program, but I do think that it did help move things forward much quicker than I thought. It was a very big year for us.
Very cool. I want to go back to Jen for a second here, as I didn't get a chance to circle back to you earlier. How does Billion evaluate ROI on something like
That's a good question, and it's one we're still trying to figure out, especially because I'm the only person that, well, as of right now, kind of manages and is in charge of strategy for our internal marketing. So I have been blessed with a boss who just kind of said, run with it, let's see what happens. And so it's been an evolving process. Once we saw that we were getting traction and that we were getting followers, we were seeing upticks in visits to our website when we tied our content into our social networking posts and whatnot. Then we went to, okay, well, how do we measure things? And so we started creating some goals, on Google Analytics. So now in our marketing meetings, one of my responsibilities is to tell people about the campaigns that we've done, how those tie into social conversions and social visitors from our website based on Twitter traffic and LinkedIn traffic and Facebook traffic. I should mention that when it comes to trying new platforms, I have to be very judicious because my time is very valuable, and when we first got into social media, we thought it's free, it's going to be easy, but what at first I did for 15, 20 minutes a day is now a full-time job. I do, managing 2 brands, 4 social networks for each brand. It just can get kind of crazy unless you have a good strategy in place. So for us to think about Instagram or Vine or Tumblr, we've got to think, okay, are our customers there? No. They might be 2 years from now, but then we'll have a whole new set of social networks to evaluate at that point. And also, finally, you mentioned tipping point, which I think is a great phrase, because I think within the last 18 months to 2 years, our customers have finally started coming to us and saying, we really like what you've done with your social networks. How can we replicate that? How do we make money off of that? And I just kind of shake my head and say, it's not that easy. But that's a whole other panel, I think. So.
I think that we might get there at the end of this discussion. I have a feeling that we're going to circle back to that topic. My next question is for Pat, but before I ask Pat, I wanted to find out how many of you in the audience are marketing to physicians? You're marketing your product or service to physicians. How many of your physicians are socially active, like engaged in social media? Okay, I think that there has been some hesitation with my client base and with the physicians that I work with to engage in social media, and Pat has a very unique perspective as a practicing physician in, how do we engage in this conversation, and how do we ensure that, that we can get this group of folks comfortable with the value of social engagement, and how do you kind of overcome that fear?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm not practicing now, so I just but I hang out with docs who practice.
Right.
Physicians are very conservative in what they do, and if you look at how long it takes for a new evidence-based practice to become widespread in clinical practice, it's about 18 years. So, that's something that's our core business, right? Practicing medicine. So when you bring social media in, you're going to have a cadre of physicians, and there are some really well-known people like Kevin MD who are using social media. There are physicians that I've talked to who are using social media. Seattle Mama Doc, I don't know if you guys have heard of her, but she's uses social media as part of the way to amplify her messages to patients, public health messages. Everybody's afraid to use social media in any way they have a one-on-one conversation. But for those of you who are trying to market to physicians, I think if you do it at this point, you're going to reach, the ones that are active, which is, probably 10-15%, depending on what area of the country you're in. I just came from Doximity. How many people know what Doximity is? So Doximity is a really cool platform. It's called LinkedIn for Doctors, and every year they have a retreat, and there were probably, I don't know, like 50 of us there, physicians that were there. And it was interesting because these are people who are advising Doximity and are tech savvy. And yet, when we did a panel like this, and we asked how many people were doing different aspects of social media, it was shockingly small.
Really?
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to hear him's.
Yeah, I actually have an interesting anecdote here that came about during the social media and influence tweet up at HITMC 14 with Shad. There was a physician sitting in the front row, and she said, "We may not be active, but we're listening." And that's a very aha moment for me, and something I'm really interested with social is really understanding your audience's behavior and then the segments within your audience. So you may not seeing them actively engage with you, but they may be listening. They may be taking that softer interaction with you, but you may not be seeing the hard thing or the in-your-face talking to you. So that's something to keep in mind as you're developing your social strategy and what audience you're targeting, is understanding their kind of behaviors that they normally take on social.
Right, but I would also segment that, because any physician who was at HIMSS is probably not in full-time practice, right? I mean, a lot of those physicians are working as CMIOs or have some kind of administrative position. Maybe they're practicing a little bit, but they're not practicing all the time. So you have to understand, if that's the group you want to reach, then they may be listening. If you want to reach people who are in practice because you're selling EMRs to clinicians in rural Kentucky, that may not be the platform that they're using.
Absolutely.
Do you experience this with Amanda?
Definitely, and that's where I think really paying attention to your analytics is just so huge. Knowing and understanding if you're echoing, we're not getting the engagement that they are looking, you can know that through your analytics, so that you can start to pay attention to the types of messaging that they are consuming and really ruling out what they are not.
I'm good. Okay, well, my next question's for you. Okay, fantastic. And this is something that I might struggle with, so I'm very excited. How as an organization, how does Billion, and how would you expect brand differentiation between your own personal brand and your company? I don't think there's anybody in this room who can name a company that I work for, which is fine. But I'm very curious about
It starts with an A,
It's
doesn't it?
Mandi be
exactly right.
Yeah.
So how is that managed? And do you find that are there corporate policies that are in effect for that, or how is that conversation happening?
If we were a larger organization, I'm sure there'd be a corporate policy in place. But as of right now, it's just me doing my thing and making sure that anything I personally put out there obviously doesn't harm our brand in any way, and if anything, promotes it. Like I said, I was, 4 or 5 years ago, I was I was certainly the first person in my company to jump on Twitter and to start retweeting what I would share from our corporate accounts. On the side, I also decided, hey, I love healthcare and IT so much that I want to keep my journalism muscles fresh and ready, and so I started blogging and generating content as, kind of outside of my job. So I had this kind of other life that was evolving and being amplified, like you mentioned, through my Twitter account. Well, God bless him, my boss just let me keep going. And we've come to realize that if your personal brand can build credibility for your corporate brand, then that's successful. So I think when people see something from Billions or Porter, they kind of know that the person behind it, or the entity behind it, knows what they're talking about. It's not just some third-party agency that maybe doesn't really know the healthcare IT space like all of the agencies in here do. So I think it just helps with credibility. It's a fine line, a gray area.
How about you, Joy? Do you struggle with that at all?
No, I don't think so. I think I really try to think about what it is that I'm supposed to be an expert at my firm, and I try to leverage my social tools for that. So again, I'm really a big proponent of thinking of social media as a vehicle or as a tool. So I might use it to, disseminate information on keeping my clients the most up to date they can on the social media stories, because they're not in the business of that. I am. It's my job as a part of Amidola Communications and having my own personal brand to make sure that they have access to that information. And then, I also am responsible for media relations, so keeping my engagement with other reporters and using that as a vehicle and a tool has helped me enhance my role at Amidola.
I imagine this is challenging for him as well.
I don't think it's very challenging. I think for us, when we look at our staff and the people that are behind our organization, they are the lifeblood of the organization, and we want them to be a part of the social strategy. So we've actually invested a lot in training and empowering staff, content experts to be more involved in the strategy and for them to help develop communities and relationships on the niche side. I mean, HIMSS is a very big organization, so how could one Twitter account really reach and develop relationships with all those different audiences that we're trying to target? So we took the approach of empowering more staff members to get on board, and we don't have anything saying that once you leave the organization, your Twitter account is ours. We just feel like we're investing in you and you're part of our organization.
Excellent. And Pat?
I think that I actually wanted to ask the audience a question.
Oh,
so
go ahead.
Is it okay to take a little?
Absolutely.
I have a lot of, and I'm wondering how many people reach out to bloggers in your space and try and get them to write a story for you on behalf of your clients. Are you finding that to be a successful strategy? Yeah. So I was really interested in that because I get particularly. You didn't put the social media ambassadors on the same list that you put media on, but last HIMSS when I was on that list, people would call me at 6 in the morning. It was unbelievable, the outreach that you get. And if there's a story that's interesting, and I write about it, or we did videos this year at HIMSS on a lot of companies, they end up really with an independent voice, because I don't do pay to play. You can't come to me and say, hey, I'll give you a bunch of money if you write about this. Maybe some bloggers do that, but I don't want to do that, which I think helps to make it be a more credible voice in the space. And what we're finding is that these little companies that we interviewed, or companies that I've written about, are now taking the videos and putting them on their website. And I'll tell you, if you tweet, I wrote about Click, which is an interesting BI tool, and they were all over it and retweeted it. So it actually helped them, and it helped me too, right? It spread my voice. So just kind of an interesting thing if you're doing that and you have relationships with the kind of bloggers that are writing in your space. It's I think an interesting addition to the toolkit.
That's something I'd like to touch on very briefly too. For all of those of you who do request that bloggers cover your content, if you could please make sure that the bloggers that you are requesting to write for you actually have an interest in your subject area, that would be helpful. Just as a little aside. I get storage area network requests. I'm like, no, thank you guys, no. Okay, so let me go back to Joy. Do you have any social media don'ts? you have any stories? Because surely we have all messed up, right? Everybody's had a serious aha moment. I have had tweets that I wish I could take back. You know, just Outlook has that retrieve feature. We don't have it on Twitter. But do you have social media don't stories to share?
Definitely. The biggest one is going to be don't do ad hoc. The reason we spend quite a lot of time in PR and marketing to develop messaging is because it should be strategic and it should maintain that higher level consistency. So I think a lot of times we understand this when we're developing our content. We understand this when we're making a byline. But we don't always, I feel like marketing and social media sometimes, especially in larger organizations, can really be developed in silos, when in reality, again, it should really be done at a higher level program and make sure it's maintaining and upholding that messaging.
That's interesting, and how that would work in a Twitter sphere or in a tweet chat would be interesting. I'd love to talk more about how Amandla strategizes those types of scenarios, but do you have any don'ts, any social media don'ts?
You know, I think one of the things I've learned most at HITMC is, you know, as social media started taking off, it became this buzzword that everyone was like, we gotta do social with this initiative, we gotta do social with that, and we started getting pulled in like 10 million different directions, and I'm sure we all can attest to how that feels. Where we are right now is we're trying to become more strategic and get integrated into the overall marketing plan tied to different initiatives, and by doing so, then we're thinking things through from a long-term perspective, and then we're able to be more sustainable and that we're not getting pulled in 10 million different directions. We're also changing the conversation from, can you tweet this, to how can we amplify this message and get it to our audience, and that's critical.
Social media don'ts. Do you have an I messed up story? This is really what I'm wanting to know. I totally goofed.
You know, that's interesting because I've totally goofed many times in my life, but not in social media. And so of course I've learned that lesson that everybody else has learned is don't push the send button, you know, until you actually looked at it and thought about it. I have some emails that I wish I'd never sent. I certainly have some letters that I wish I'd never sent, but I'm trying to be really, really careful on social media because it's going to be around, you know, basically forever.
Right. What about you, Jen?
To Cari's point of how social media is a buzzword, especially in healthcare, IT right now, even though it's reached its tipping point, it's popular, everyone has heard the word, don't assume that everyone on your team knows what it is, understands it, can automatically jump in and do it well. Because I found that that's not the case. Some people can, some people don't care to, and if they don't want to, then please don't make them, because it's not good for anybody. But it takes time. It took time for us to learn it, to use it effectively, and it's going to take time for people who, you know, it's not on their daily radar. But you know, the folks at Billions and Porter have been great over the last couple of years about just kind of letting me hold their hand a little bit and show them what to do and how to get engaged. And slowly but surely, you know, we're starting to see some success from that.
Awesome. I had another question for Cari that had been written up, but I'm going to bail on that one because I want to circle back to you talking about hiring and this kind of going forward with this theme. How do you hire for social media, you know, your social media personnel? How do you hire them? How do you train them, especially when the space is changing this quickly?
It's a really good question.
It's way better than the other question that I had.
I think some of the key things that I look for in the staff that I'm hiring is personality and are you naturally social? Because if you're not naturally social in person, the likelihood that you're going to build a relationship with our audience and have a personality is next to none. Also, good writers. Good writing and being able to put something that makes sense, especially in health IT. Being able to digest information and then put it in 140 characters is a great skill. And I think that that's why I've always leaned more towards hiring people with writing backgrounds versus just solely marketing backgrounds. Yeah, and I think just for our organization, it's really important that people are able to adapt to change, and that's one of the critical things that I look for.
How many of you guys out there in the audience actually have a team who's responsible for your social media? And a team can be one person, but okay, so there's someone who is actively responsible for engaging in social media as part of their job. Okay. Jen, how does Billions hire? Very curious. Right now,
They hired me 12 years ago, that's unhired.
And then you're the director, do you have an additional staff?
We have about 5 other people that are really actively working on social media right now, and one of the biggest things I would say I look for is having sound social properties yourself.
Right.
So if you can build your own brand, you can obviously amplify the messages of my clients as well. So.
Cool. Pat, last question goes back to you. If you want to
Well, so I do have a team, and I have to say that if you're on the other edge of the age spectrum and you're thinking about hiring anybody to do anything that's got a technical component like Twitter or blog posting or videos that we do, I say look for someone in their 20s, right? They just aren't afraid of this stuff. And can I do a pitch for my one of my employees is right here in the front row, Tammy Tran, who's absolutely amazing. And she came to me as an Edge intern. So if you all are looking for young people that you'd like to bring into the organization on a trial basis, Edge interns is just absolutely phenomenal because they're all been vetted. They're all in their 20s. None of them are afraid to push any button anywhere electronically. And for me, that's really helpful because I have that. I'm not a digital native. So if you're not a digital native, it helps to build a tribe of them.
Right. What are the platforms, and this is again, I'm going to go off script here, so what are the platforms that you're using that you're finding most effective? I know I continuously say Twitter and social media interchangeably, and I know that that's not the case. But, and since the last question was to go to you, Pat, I'll let you start. Like, what are the platforms where, that you use and
Okay,
how are they effective?
for Twitter, I use a lot of Twitter, and I use Hootsuite. That happens to be
Your tool of choice.
my tool of choice. But I, as I mentioned before, I find LinkedIn really helpful. And I'm not a Facebook fan. I never do anything on my personal Facebook. But when I want to have something on Facebook, I have people who love Facebook and will do it for me. And I'm still trying to figure out Google+. Anybody here figured out Google+? Because if you have, talk to me at the reception and help me really understand how to back it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That nebulous term, it's supposed to for SEO, yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, I count the blog as a part of social media. And then the new foray for us is doing the video interviews and then Blog Talk Radio. And the next thing that we're going to do is to start trying to do some blog commentaries. So, instead of having a long blog,
Right.
to be able to comment on something in a relatively short, I'm thinking of 140 seconds or less,
Right.
Video where you can get your message out. Because increasingly people, particularly younger people, don't read. And if they do read, they want it to be short, and they love videos.
Right. What about you guys?
I think really the biggest part is, again, understanding your audience. So if I'm trying to reach consumers, then Facebook might be a good idea. I think Twitter and LinkedIn have been a pretty general, great thing, but really understanding and getting in the nitty-gritty of your client's sales cycle. What does it look like? Because we now have an empowered customer, right? We don't have people necessarily picking up the phone, knocking on our door, coming in the storefront to touch and feel the product, or even the solution, or ask us about it. So it becomes really important when they're looking for that information to put it in the right spot. So Gartner says that 60% of the buying cycle, and it's going to go to 90 in the next few years, is actually done before they even pick up the phone to find you. So finding those platforms where they are specifically, making sure they're right for you, and then putting the content in those platforms becomes really huge.
Okay.
One of the things that we've been playing with a little bit more, and like the primary channels that we use are LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And LinkedIn and Twitter are probably our strongest channels to reach our audience, and we see the most engagement on. But also knowing the purpose for each channel. So we've been playing a lot with our Facebook channel for HITMC, the association, and playing with what kind of content we've been putting out there. And we've been really leaning towards more humorous, more engaging, more visual, and we've been really playing it up there. And we've just gotten to over 10,000 fans there, and we think that's a huge milestone for us in understanding kind of what is our audience doing on that platform. they're not gonna have the LinkedIn discussion to the long article, you know, they wanna have that on their professional network. So it's really also understanding, I think, the audience's behavior on each network and then playing to those, and you're able to reach them.
Excellent. LinkedIn for us, being in the B2B space, has just been huge. Twitter's great, especially for amplification, but when it comes to conversions and site traffic, LinkedIn has definitely worked the best for us. We have a LinkedIn group, which is where we post our thought leadership pieces, or articles, blogs, commentary of any sort. We also are pretty active on our company pages, and we started a separate group for customers. So if you're not a customer, you can't join the group. And we've just seen great return on investment from that.
Awesome. We've got 5 minutes left in the panel part before we open it up for questions. So do you guys want to ask each other any questions? Joy does.
Definitely. How do you think we could leverage an ambassador program for something more like a brand in a PR perspective?
That's a good question, and I will brainstorm on the fly. You know, I think when you think about partnering with influencers, it's like really about developing a relationship. So if you could think of a tactic where you could develop that relationship over a period of time, I think that like even our ambassador program of how we did it with conference could be applicable working with people for all year long and like helping them and helping us. So it's like, how do we make this an exchange relationship? I don't know. I mean, I think that the primary things is that you need to make sure that it's beneficial for the influencer too. Otherwise, that relationship would just die.
Kind of like a revised, revamped affiliate network program, really. I would think.
But I think you have to steer away, at least with physicians, from pay for play, because there's a lot of backlash for that now.
No. I'm thinking. You're thinking. Well, while you think, do we have any questions from the audience? Excellent, Chandresh.
So, should healthcare IT companies encourage their employees to have their own handles versus a company handle for social media, broadcast? Because one of the things you said was you don't do ad hoc. You want driven by strategy. On the other hand, we hear social is about conversation. And you can't have a conversation just on a strategy. It has to be more personal. So I fail to understand that.
Definitely. I think you should encourage training. I think that's the biggest thing. If we're talking about the social aspect of it, you have to have the want to do it in the first place. So it's really about mentoring and giving the right tools and the right education so that they can be successful. And you can still have messaging and still have a conversation for your other question. The biggest thing is, again, this is where marketing and social media have really become siloed. When I say this should be one, we hear a lot, content is king. We need to develop content. And that's true. But what we're really looking to do is create custom conversation. And that custom conversation can have those pithy bites of what we're trying to get across while still being entertaining and still connecting and still making relationships.
I'm going to support what she's saying, and when you would have to think about both too, and I would also say you need to think about your objectives. Like, do you really want to give your organization a specific face? And if that is the case, if your goal and objective is to get your CEO out there, then maybe you need to consider whether or not, especially if they're socially savvy or not, whether or not that's the right move. But I think that one of the things that when we think about brands on social media, not all of them have personality, and you should encourage them to have personality. And when you're hiring someone to be your social media manager on social, they should feel that they can bring personality to the table and they can represent your brand with a voice. And that voice can be unique to that person. And when I was co-managing with my colleague, the HITMC brand, we both had different tones, but we would also sign our tweets and be transparent about who it was. And that's good.
I think it can also go back to strategy and whether the folks that you are thinking about putting on your social media team want to be there. I'll just tell a quick story about, I think a great way to personify this is tweet chats. So when I started lurking on tweet chats, and then when I decided I got some courage and started participating in tweet chats, I thought, well, it's a chat, it's a conversation with other people. I don't want to do it behind a brand, I want to do it as myself. And that's part of a larger corporate strategy. It depends on the business, who might be listening. You've got to consider what customers out there that might be lurking, what you as a person might want to spit out there but you can't delete. That might affect, business down the line. So you really got to think about, well, if we want to keep it personal and we want to let people just have their own Twitter handles with the expectation that they will, mind their P's and Q's, are they going to be okay with that? Because a personal Twitter account, they could have had it 5 years before they even joined the company, and they may not want that. They might feel like they're under some sort of stranglehold. So I think you've got to evaluate the person, you've got to evaluate your objectives, and you've got to think about how you want to put this person out there. Whether it's just the occasional tweet, whether it's getting conversational, whether it's representing your company as a social ambassador at a huge conference like HITMC.
I can say I'm really, really grateful that I don't have a boss who's watching what I tweet, because I'm pretty sure that few people care about my CrossFit random things that I have to say. But because it's my personal account, it's my own personal brand, I go with it because it's authentic to me, right? It's just all part of who I am. But I am grateful that I don't have that constraint.
Yeah, and I want to put a consumer hat on, because we're all also consumers, and being an N1 consumer. If a certain Twitter account is just pushing messages out to me, branding messages out to me, I don't know, I don't really even pay attention to them. But it can be a company, and if they push something out that's of value to me, a link to a really cool article that may be relevant to your business, it isn't saying come to HITMC, but it's saying here's something really interesting and new in health IT, and there's a link to it. I'll save that and open it, and you get a brownie point, right?
Right.
You didn't get me your marketing message, but you got a brownie point. I feel better about you.
Right. Yes, Denise.
Okay, I represent a brand's Twitter handle and only a brand, so I'm not gonna, I see already the blurring of the lines between, should I say what I think in this tweet chat on Friday morning, or should I just not say anything because I can't represent our company?
Right.
Opinion, right? I should only be represented anyway. But I wanted to get back to that whole conversation of social media return on investment. And maybe it's directed more toward Jen, because she's more on this panel representing a brand or a company brand. Are you adding in links with campaign ID codes to the content that you're tweeting about?
Yes.
So you can track the links into your, let's say, Salesforce.com, or
Yes,
that to me is where all this is headed, or is already there. And I would love to hear more about how people are doing that. Are they successful? Are they getting conversions? Are they getting prospects? Are they managing them through the sales cycle?
We are doing that. It's kind of on an as-needed basis. It's not something we have a formal strategy around. I wouldn't say it's been unsuccessful or successful. We're still in the experimental phase because our particular sales cycle is so long.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, well, that tweet caused that visit to our website. 6 months later, they gave us a call. 3 months after that, they signed up. So it's an experiment. If anybody in the audience maybe has experience with that they want to share, or anybody else in the panel, please do.
I was really intrigued with what you were saying, though. Is like, this is where HITMC is too in terms of measurement. We're looking at audience, we're looking at the people that are interacting with our conversation or with our communications, but then we're also adding the unique URL parameters now, especially for specific campaigns, to kind of understand our audience's behavior over a period of time, and then whether or not a conversion would happen from social media. But yeah, we need to also look at, social media's purpose isn't for the conversion, it's to influence people over time, and that's what I love about what Jen said, is that what we do takes time. We're not going to ever see an immediate return. We may see people sharing our content, but we're not going to see it right away.
Well, there may not be something that's immediate from a sales cycle perspective, but if we think about social engagement as a platform for something like recruiting new employees, I would think that that's something that might be more immediately measurable from a conversion standpoint. Do any of you guys use social media for recruiting and hiring purposes? Not yet.
I mean, HITMC uses it on LinkedIn, I know, but it's not something that we're like proactively using and measuring. We're primarily using it to build relationships, and then also look at ways to engage people in our content and information.
Yeah,
Yeah, Mandy, one thing you can add is that when we start talking about ROI, there's an ROI on the marketing part, but there's also an ROI on the sales part. So if you assume that the ROI is directly on sales, you might be disappointed. But
Right.
there's easy to capture ROI on marketing, and then start to think about how does the sales funnel actually get filled using the ROI for marketing. So if you're talking to me as an executive, and you actually say that I do this to prepare the funnel and the pipeline, and this is how stuff gets into the pipeline, then they understand that. But what we really have trouble with is we can't just say that, well, we're gonna do all this stuff, but we're not quite sure when it's going to work. You know, at some point, like even if you had a normal conversation with somebody, we send salespeople out to have relationship conversations routinely.
All the time.
And we don't measure that necessarily, but we know that fills the pipeline.
Right.
So I think as we start to think about that and filling the pipeline, it may actually do that communication a little bit easier than
Right.
just saying we don't know.
And I think it's important to set expectations, because we had a client that we were using social media to promote a crowdfunding campaign. And we hadn't set the expectations, and her thought was it was going to translate directly to contributions to the crowdfund, which of course it didn't. And then she ended up telling us, oh, this social media stuff just doesn't work, because she got well known during that period of time when her company's name was all over the place, but it didn't translate into donations, so she was disappointed.
Right.
Well, kind of continuing this, I mean, my question is a lot like that. How do I tell my CFO that I need to hire a social media manager? Because even though we're using a marketing automation system and a CRM that measure all this, I have yet to be able to take a visit from a tweet and have that trace that directly to a requested demo, and does anything that's measurable on the company's bottom line. So the only metric I'm able to come back with is site visit. And traffic is good, but as far as I can tell, that's really the only KPI that I'm able to say, and that's a pretty hard sell to say, well, you've got $60,000 plus expenses to have somebody get some more site traffic that may or may not be the right traffic, and may or may not someday turn into a marketing influence lead, whether marketing qualified or sales qualified. So I just can't explain in terms of budget why I'm justified in hiring somebody, and I'd love to hear how somebody else can do it.
I think it's always hard to convince CFOs of anything. But you know, if you can sell them on reputation being worth something, because if you're known now because of your social media reach, and eventually that translated into the demo because the person said, oh yeah, I've actually heard of them, they're not a complete unknown, and it's hard to make that link. But there are tools like TweetReach that measure how many people actually saw a certain tweet. They have, so number of accounts reached and number of impressions, and you can take screenshots of them. I use that a lot. So, when you get a really influential person retweeting you and you end up with, reaching 1.5 million accounts, and you have, 1 million impressions, I don't know if that'll impress your CFO, but it'll impress the market.
And I would think that there's Gartner or Forrester research to support a social organization versus a non-social organization with respect to conversions and marketing effectiveness. So I would think that there would be analytics that your CFO could understand, because they're from the large consulting firms that are able to back up your request for a social media manager.
And I was just going to say, keeping in mind for those of us who are supporting a brand, it's about upholding that brand too. In the absence of us placing these messages into the market will define you. And the way they define you might not be good, and it might not be the way you want to be perceived. So you're very empowered through social media to really shape those perceptions and put the right content in the very correct and targeted place for them to consume the messages so that you have the image you want.
And what are your competitors doing? Are they active? Because I mean, it's something, if you're successful socially, it's pretty apparent.
They're not terribly active because our particular space is revenue cycle, and so it's a very, very small marketplace. And I mean, we more or less, thanks to billions, know the names of everybody that we need to talk to. I mean, we know who they are, they know who we are.
I'm gonna tweet that.
Okay.
That's right.
Show it to my general manager at my next marketing meeting. In a brand.
Yeah, it's tough because it's not a space that's really incredibly active in social media, and And so I've been concentrating on LinkedIn mostly, because that's really the place where I feel like I can demonstrate things like reputation control best. As far as Twitter, yeah, we've got 2 coming up on 3 accounts, and they're reasonably active, essentially to make sure that nobody else is talking about us. And yeah, Hootsuite is my landing page, etc. But nonetheless, it's very, very hard to convince people who are in charge of building up the numbers that this is having a real effect on the bottom line.
I think that opens up kind of a larger conversation about I think I'm starting to see a trend in, I don't know if anybody else has read articles like social media manager is dead. You know, it's not necessarily about having one person be the catalyst for all of your social efforts. It's about trying to get those who are willing and so inclined across the organization involved in social, and so it's a balancing act.
Yeah, you just what you mentioned I think is really important, and we talked about how much work actually goes into learning how to use the platforms, and that person is taking extra time outside of their regular day job. So do you guys know of any ways that people are rewarded or compensated for putting that effort in and actually participating in social media for the company?
A lot of clients that I've worked with in the past actually had rewards programs. They were rewarded for engagement. You could accumulate points, much in the way that sales incentives work. They can work in a similar function, just at a much smaller scale, and win prizes. It really creates ripples in the company.
I don't want to cut this off too soon, but we've got a lot of questions. I want to make sure that we get it.
I have 2 questions. First question is, can each of you can give example of each social media site so that I can consider it as a case study, which I can refer. Second question is, how great idea it is to just keep on like sending promotions through the social media, like this offer and that offer.
Yeah, I think in general we would all collectively say no. I actually have hacks so that I don't have to look at anything that has a booth affiliated with it or this and that and the other.
Yeah, that's the quickest way for your message not to be seen.
Yeah.
Putting promos through, you need to earn the right to seed in a marketing message.
Right.
Okay.
But
So the first question was again, can each of you can give some like your personally preferred social media and like which company is doing it best so that we can do a case study? I mean, it's kind of very broad question.
That's a really tough question. Go ahead. Yeah, we'll let Jen do it.
I love health standards.
Yes.
They do it great.
Which one is this?
At Health Standards, they have done they're the model that I have tried to emulate. They have done a great job of taking a thought leadership position and kind of separating it from the corporate CorePoint Health account or brand or what have you. And so, so that's who I would investigate and look to for inspiration.
I will highlight CDW Healthcare and some of the things that they were doing around HIMSS 14 and other conferences. They've been playing up being a source of different kind of information and not just demonstrating kind of their knowledge in the space and what their product does, but they've been really focusing on developing content for the conference attendee to get people engaged. And by making that diversification, I think that they've been really successful in like hooking people and engaging them into a broader conversation and then positioning themselves to make that ultimate like come to my booth call.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. I know that there have been several hands up here. Yes, sir.
Given that the recipients, the people who you're targeting, are skimming and scanning through a great variety of media and text, to what extent do any of you, if at all, take into account, shape things in your words and phrases, knowing that people are skimming and scanning? In other words, how does it affect what you're writing, other than the fact that you're already writing a tweet? What is it you're trying to do? What techniques, what approaches have you, if you do at all, try to take that into account?
So my staff, they've done a great job in differentiating their messages. I'm going to give a shout out to Michael Gaspar. I hope he's watching. Michael's fantastic, and he's been doing a lot of playing around with how to position a tweet to be more eye-catching. So he will even provide like a small thing in the front to like add additional context. If it's a webinar, or if it's a white paper, or if it's a visual post, he prefaces that, and then he also kind of makes a clear call to action, or like asks a question if he just wants to have engagement. And I think he does a really good job of trying to like hook someone in, and also understanding that people don't have a lot of time. He's also been the one driving the visual communications on our Facebook page, which he's been responsible for growing that page. And so he's done a great job of understanding kind of the audience behavior and then how to hook them in.
We've resorted to, I don't want to say resort, but we've noticed that people click and retweet a lot more when our tweets or the titles of our content are like, top 3 this, top 5 that.
Yeah.
People like
Love lists.
chunky
Yeah.
lists, bullets, things that don't take them more than 2 minutes to read.
Absolutely.
I'll agree with that. Yeah.
Guy Kawasaki does it, like.
Oh, Guy, he's
right,
fantastic.
so,
Yeah.
you know,
He's an excellent case study. Guy Kawasaki, he would be an excellent case study as well for you to look at from a social media model standpoint. Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, our time is up. That wraps it up. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists.